superpower is nervous, when that superpower feels themselves vulnerable, they tend to react, if not overreact, if not panic. And so we entered an era in this decade of the superpower feeling vulnerable, overreacting, and panicking. And that has come about principally because they don't seem to be able, nor do we clearly, grasp what that threat is. What has caused this problem? Close to home. Very close to home. In our case, very close. In their case, at home, when those towers went down. And one of the reasons that they're not able to grasp is that the other side is no more some nation state with its army and its political structures as the Russians were in the Cold War, but in fact it is terrorism and extremism. It's an expression of societies that is pushed well beyond the rules. The extremists don't play by any of the rules that have taken centuries and centuries to build. And they're dragging us down the road of not playing by those rules either. And that's why we are at risk, even here, when we see things like our equivalent of the Patriot Act that fiddles with our civil liberties, when we see our neighbor permitting torture, which fiddles fundamentally with human rights, when we see them accepting to go against conventions like Geneva Conventions with permitting Guantanamo Bay, while we see them putting in prison for 6 years a child soldier who'd been shot twice. We're being dragged down the same road as the guys on the other side because we don't seem to grasp how to solve it, how to prevent it. And that overreaction is creating enormous amount of turbulence in the world. And that turbulence is not assisting all those imploding nations with their problems trying to come to solutions without falling into conflict. And so that's why there's no way that Americans are going to be able to participate in Darfur. And when I went in front of the American Senate, the Subcommittee on Human Rights and the Law, and they asked me, what should we Americans do? I said, the first thing you do is don't come. Give us support. Give us political support. Squeeze the Chinese to permit the Sudanese, and certainly the moderates therein, to get a grasp of the situation. And continue to provide, as they do now, 84% of all the humanitarian aid. But don't send your soldiers, because you've created the frictions with Iraq, with the Muslim world that is only going to exacerbate the situation. So we've got the world power that is sort of being held back, or has created scenarios that is preventing us as middle powers from being able to maneuver. Or maybe giving us the excuse not to maneuver because maybe we want to feel okay with them. Which brings me to an interesting, if I may say, anecdote. When I was doing my first part of my research on child soldiers at Harvard, it was in 2004, and it was during George Bush's second election. And so Harvard is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it is a very liberal part of the United States. And yet, even there, during that election, there was no dissension against Bush. There was no taking him on in regards to the Patriot Act and abuses of human rights. There was no strong arguments about Iraq and how to readjust that situation. There was this sense of vulnerability in the Americans that was never there before, for they had never really been attacked before. Except, I wonder if you have ever seen the movie Patton with George C. Scott. In the movie, the start of the movie, George C. Scott is wearing all his bells and whistles as General Patton, and he comes on to a stage and he's got a huge American flag behind him. And he says, the aim, gentlemen, is to make the other poor bastard die for his country. That was classic warfare. It's called attrition warfare. That's how war was conducted, even up into the Cold War. So when I go and speak at those American colleges or military colleges or war colleges and staff colleges. I walk on stage, and when I was in uniform I had my bells and whistles, but now a little less, and I put a big Canadian flag on behind. And I walk to the center of the stage, and I won't do that here because I'll fall off, and so I stand here and I say, ladies and gentlemen, I come from a country that beat you guys twice. And I say, well, 1775 and the War of 1812. Now, you Americans might think that you won that war, and some people say both sides won the war. But I know we won. Because what we did is far more effective than what you did. What you guys did, you came up north, you looked at this town called York, now Toronto, you burned the place down. I'm from Montreal, that doesn't bother me. Well, we went to Washington. Washington was built on a swamp. It's hot, it's humid. We burnt the place down. You rebuilt the thing at the same place. We won. We know who won that one. And that sort of atmosphere is an atmosphere that we have a certain levity with. But for them, the world power has been found vulnerable. And they're trying to grasp it. And in so doing, are creating responses in an era of complexity and ambiguity that are not necessarily assisting us, nor those imploding nations around the world from going to catastrophic failure, and rendering development work just that much more complex and more difficult to do in a secure fashion. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we have options, however, as we look at this scenario that we've been living, that we're taking stock of, and that we can anticipate being there for a while to come. We can hopefully survive it, and that is to say, hey, we're in Canada, nobody's going to attack us. I mean, just look at the maps when you watch a weatherman in the States, eh? You look at the map. There's this big gray mass north of the United States. There's nothing there. I was at Harvard, and I had someone ask me, do you guys have cable up there? I said, of course we have cable, because the igloos can't hold the antennas for satellite. This gray mass, eh? And the first year I was there, the only time I ever heard of Canada was once a terrible storm was coming into the Boston area, and what it was, this cold mass coming from Canada. That's the only time I heard Canada in the whole year. It was incredible in that place. And so we can hope that nobody will find us. We're not on an American map, how can they find us? The problem is, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're no more that little colony off to the side. We are now, and have moved, at an accelerated pace, to becoming one of the leading middle powers in the world. And in so doing, we have stumbled into an arena that has responsibilities and also could attract problems that are not necessarily of our making, or that we have not necessarily been wise enough to prevent. So, if that's the case, let's build a wall. We'll keep them up. And that was the reaction after 9/11. The Americans wanted us to build a wall in a sort of virtuous way. No one with any evil sort of would come into the country. No one with a black mustache is allowed in. And then we'll work our way down from there. That will move us to a police state. That is not necessarily advancing the situation in regards to what we have been working for all these years in the developed world. So the other option is why sit back and let it happen? Why not try to stop it? Why not try to prevent it? Let's go to the source of that rage that's in the developing world and attenuate it, reduce it. Try to take away the frictions that are there that are leading them to extremism and to conflict.